Hey everybody, so this is a test run of the speech I'm giving in Japan in 3 days' time. So I'm going to try it out here. Hopefully in a few days it'll be more conversational, but for right now I'm pretty much just reading it off the page for you. So, good afternoon. As a Chinese Canadian, this is an interesting time for me to be in Japan. I'm here to speak about my understanding of the Nanking Holocaust, an event that involves the country of my heritage and the country that I am here visiting for the first time today. Thank you for inviting me. The journey that brings me to this moment began in Edmonton, Canada, where I was born and raised. Now, in Edmonton, it snows up to 8 months of the year, and about 80% of the population is of European descent. Living in a city where I looked different from most of the people around me, I was constantly questioning my cultural identity. My parents tried to help me with that. They enrolled me in an elementary school where I learned Mandarin through a Mandarin bilingual program that they helped co-found. But by junior high, I wanted an afro and permed my hair to look like a hip-hop artist named Kid and Play. In my last year of high school, I was very excited to see an Asian American author named Olivia Cheng on the cover of a magazine. She'd written a book called The Rape of Nanking. It told the story of the Nanking Massacre during World War II. I saved the magazine as a reminder to buy the book one day. Years would pass before I would fulfill that promise. In that time, I became a television news journalist. I wrote hip-hop and youth culture articles for newspapers across Canada, and I also expanded into acting when I joined the cast of an Emmy Award-winning miniseries that touched on Asian American historical issues. It was through filming that project that I remembered Iris's book, The Rape of Nanking. I finally decided it was time to read that book, and what I learned about the rape of Nanking shocked and horrified me. Now, I'm not here as a historical expert. I'm a kid from Edmonton here to humbly express my understanding of what happened in Nanking. I'm a Chinese Canadian born in the modern world, looking back at an act of violence that still resonates in both our communities today. Here's what I understand of Nanking. On December 13, 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army seized Nanking and began a 6-week orgy of violence that killed 300,000 Chinese citizens. One historian has estimated that if all the victims' bodies were stacked on top of each other, they would reach the height and be as tall as a 74-story building. Now, for me, it was the way in which these people were tortured that was the most shocking. Up to 80,000 females were raped, including young girls and grandmothers. Many soldiers went beyond rape to disembowel victims, to slice off their breasts or nail them alive to walls. Fathers were forced to rape their daughters. Sons were forced to rape their mothers, while other family members were forced to watch. Killing contests and games were made out of executions. People were buried alive. Cutting their organs out, decapitation, and roasting people alive became routine. Other, more devious cruelties were invented, such as hanging people by their tongues from iron hooks and burying people up to their waist before setting vicious dogs on them. The madness was witnessed by a group of foreign missionaries and scholars who chose to stay behind in Nanking to help the Chinese. They were led by a Nazi, yes, a Nazi named John Rabe, who became known as the Oskar Schindler of China, the living Buddha. With a team of other foreigners, Rabe set up an international safety zone, effectively saving the remaining half of Nanking. He would walk the streets of Nanking, stopping rapes and killings by flashing his Nazi armband. Iris Cheng discovered his detailed diaries documenting the event while researching her book. Now, what I've told you is only a fraction of what I learned about the rape of Nanking. I know there's a lot of debate about Iris Cheng's book here in Japan, but I was so moved by what I learned that I immediately went on the internet to look up Iris Cheng. I wanted to send her a letter to say thank you, but when I searched her name, that's when I found out that she'd passed away a year ago at that point. I continued to think about Iris, and I continued to think about the story of Nanking that she'd been so moved to write. You see, Iris's grandparents had escaped Nanking, but not before witnessing the horror that their granddaughter would later document as a journalist. Out of my own curiosity, I got in touch with Iris's family, Iris's friends, her colleagues, to do my own research. And within a year, I was surprised to hear about a film called Iris Cheng, The Rape of Nanking, that was in development here in Canada. They were looking for an actress to play the role of Iris. I wrote a letter to the director and was cast in the film. And a few months later, I stood in the city of Nanking, a city I had only read about through a book written by a woman I was now playing. So you see, the Nanking Massacre, although it happened over 70 years ago, is still an issue that people around the world talk about. Now, when I was invited to come to Japan, I thought about it for a long time before accepting. I wondered how I would be received. I wondered what message I would be sending by coming here, especially at such a politically sensitive time between Japan and China. But I finally decided to come, not to side with one culture and point fingers at another just because I'm Chinese. In fact, I recognize that China has its own record of violence against its own people and the people of other nations. So why am I here? I'm here because I want to stand for a world of nonviolence and peace. And I don't know if a nonviolent world is important to you, but if it is, how do we create a world of nonviolence without first acknowledging our track record of violence so we can even begin to understand what happened to keep it from happening again? Remember, I come from Canada. We are a country with our own legacy of violence. In the late 19th century, the Canadian government forced Indigenous peoples onto tiny patches of land called reservations. The government took away their children to destroy their cultures and languages. And eventually, in the 20th century, Canadians forced their government to return hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of land and pay hundreds of millions of dollars in reparations. Recently, the Prime Minister issued an official apology to Indigenous children who were taken from their families. When Canada built the Great Railroad, 6,000 Chinese men blast tunnels through Rocky Mountains, uniting the West Coast and the East Coast by laying railroad ties in all weather. They suffered terribly, and their sacrifice was repaid by a Canadian government that levied a head tax against each Chinese laborer, effectively ensuring that they began their days in Canada with a massive debt. They were unable to bring their families over to join them in Canada as a result. And just 4 years ago, my government finally issued an official apology and paid reparations to the Chinese community. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, 22,000 Japanese Canadians were arrested and held in internment camps, some who were fourth-generation Japanese Canadians who had never set foot in Japan. The government seized their fishing boats, their businesses, their homes, and only in 1988 did Prime Minister Brian Mulroney offer an apology to Japanese Canadians and pay a multi-million-dollar compensation package to survivors. So, if you applaud the strength and humility it takes anyone to confront their past, then wouldn't it be an amazing example to the world if the young Japanese in this country asked questions in the name of peace, asked questions of the world around them, asked questions of events like the Nanking Massacre, not to blame for past decisions, but to promote peace and reconciliation right now. Because with the internet, with our ability to communicate on an instantaneous global level, we have the power to begin a dialogue about whatever we want. Put our countries of origin aside. Put our governments aside. Put aside the fact that I'm Chinese and you're Japanese, because you and me can talk. So whether you are inspired to question what happened in Nanking, or whether you're inspired to question something else in the world in the name of upholding peace, do it. Question. And maybe one day, you and I will talk. Thank you. Domo arigatou gozaimasu.